everybody, and welcome back to the channel. I'm super excited today to be reviewing the Marvel Select Invisible Woman. Now, of course, I've wanted the Invisible Woman for quite a long time in my collection, but what's really exciting is that this does finally complete the quartet. It's been a very long time coming. The first member of Marvel's first family was The Thing to be released in this line, and he was released at least over a decade ago, and between then and now we've only just completed the lineup. But this is tremendously exciting and I'm really keen to get started. So without further ado, let's take a look at the packaging. Now, this is the oversized packaging that we all know and love from Marvel Select. It is chunky, it is heavy, and it looks pretty impressive and bulky on the shelf, or when you put it on display. You're getting an awful lot here. As always, we get the collage in the background taken from various different images from the source material, different comics from across the years, which looks great. We have the big banner, the card banner on the left hand side of the packaging, which looks pretty cool, clearly stating that this is the Invisible Woman. And then we have this wonderful clamshell packaging with the window display there, showing the Invisible Woman and her various bits and pieces in terms of accessories, which looks really good. So this looks really impressive. It's very colourful, it's very bright, it looks just gigantic, and it's just really very skillful packaging indeed. Now, if we look at the side panel, this is the nice chunky side panel that we're used to seeing in traditional releases. Occasionally we get these more thinned down, slimmer packages that we've come to see over recent years, but in this case, because of some of the accessories that the Invisible Woman comes with, this has to be a little bit thicker, a little bit deeper. So this looks really good. We have an image here taken of the figure itself rather than a comic book image. As we know, it tends to be hit and miss with what approach. There doesn't seem to be much rhyme or reason in terms of how Diamond Select approach whether they're going to use a comic book image or a photo of the figure, but this is at least consistent with Mr. Fantastic, who we had earlier in the year, so you can stack these up on your shelf side by side, and it looks really cool. For obviously it's text free and it's very bright, and it's a really good strong image. Now, on the reverse of the packaging, again we have another strong image of the figure, and we see the various different alternative looks for the character and the different bits and pieces that come with it. So this looks really good, this looks great on display. However you put this on, whether you're looking at the front or the back, whether you want to put it on your shelf on its side, this is going to look really nice in your collection. Interestingly, they choose to put the figure in the packaging with some of her effects in place, so we can see that there's translucent elements to the legs and to the hands and the forearms as well, which is pretty cool, although we do have the ability to swap them out, which we'll take a look at a little bit later. Now, the first thing I want to comment on is the head sculpt, because I've got to be honest, I'm not a huge fan of the approach they've taken here. This looks very, very sharp, very stern for Sue Storm, and yeah, there's definitely a case that can be made for that, but it's a shame. This just looks a little bit too harsh for me. I tend to think of it being a lot softer, a little bit more fun, and this just seems to have captured a side of it that's a little bit more aggressive or a little bit more annoyed than perhaps is how I tend to think of the character. So this will largely be up to yourself in terms of how you interpret the character, but this just doesn't look quite right to me, and that's a little bit disappointing. Now, the hair piece is actually like a very thick rubber. It will definitely have impact on the articulation, as we'll see a little bit later, but there are some nice washes running through it, giving it a little bit of depth and texture. The paint apps are quite nice for the most part on the face, and we can see that that Fantastic Four logo there is actually sculpted in, again very nicely painted, and there's a number of different washes running throughout this figure over the blue. There's some like black washes there to just give it a bit more depth overall, a bit more texture, something that they've had great success with in the past, even more recently with the Mr. Fantastic figure. I commend them highly on this. So it's the same approach here. In terms of the paint apps, it looks really good. This is where Marvel Select definitely have the advantage over things like Marvel Legends and some of their comparators, such as McFarlane Toys, DC Multiverse line. They just really skimp on the paint apps, and this is a really good example of just how you can capitalize on a fantastic sculpt with a wonderful set of paint apps to just really bring it to life. And Diamond Select always to push the boat out in this area, and it makes all the difference. So as always, top marks for Diamond Select for the attention and care they put into the overall look and presentation of their figures. Now, I did want to comment very briefly that on the reverse of the figure you will see there is actually a peg hole in the centre of the back there. That's important because there is an accessory that requires this to be utilised a little bit later. So it does ruin the overall visual effect somewhat, but it's quite subtle, and if you're looking at the figure from the front, you're not going to have any issues. As I mentioned, the figure does come packaged with the translucent hands, forearms and legs. Now these are swappable, there are accessories so you can have the solid fill as well, but I think it's interesting that they start with the effect, and I think it's pretty cool, and they've done a nice job of realising this. Now of course, if you get your camera phone out and put the torch on, you can definitely look at the overall effect of how the light shines through this. I think this looks pretty cool, and I think they've done a nice job of the gradient between the blue and between the translucent plastic there as well. It's quite effective and it looks really pretty cool. Okay, so looking at the articulation, let's start with the head. As you can see, there is a ball joint at the top of the neck there, but because of that hairpiece, it's very resistant. You're not really getting a lot of movement out of this at all. It can just about look left and right, and in theory it should look up and down, but really there's not a lot of give here. Now there are ball joints in the shoulders, so the arms will lift up and out. There is a complementary bicep swivel, which is great. Sadly, there is just a pin swivel at the elbow, so the arm will only go to hinge to about 90 degrees, which is a shame, but it will spin all the way around. At the top of the gauntlet of the glove there is another swivel, so that lower forearm will rotate all the way around, and then there is a pin swivel at the wrist, allowing the hand to rotate all the way around, and of course hinge forwards and backwards. Now, because it is a translucent plastic, we do know of course to be extra careful with these pieces because they do have a tendency to snap, so be warned. She also has a ball joint in the top of the chest area, which is great, so she can spin from side to side at the top of the chest, which is good. There's actually some movement there, allowing her to lean left and right as well, which is pretty sizable, which is very much appreciated. So I think this is working pretty well. I'm glad to see this. There's also a complementary swivel at the waist as well that allows the figure to spin all the way around. So in this torso area, we're getting actually quite a lot of articulation, which is nice to see. Now, of course, the figure can also bend forwards and backwards through that upper torso ball joint, which is pretty nice to see, although it does tend to favour leaning backwards rather than forwards. There's ball joints in the hips which are hinged, so those legs will kick out to the side. There is a complementary thigh swivel at the top there, allowing the leg to spin around. There's also a pin swivel at the knee as well, so that lower leg will spin all the way around, as well as hinging to about 90 degrees. So the legs will kick forwards, they'll go backwards a little bit, and then as we can see, that lower leg bending to 90 degrees there. And then finally there is an ankle pivot, allowing that foot to hinge forwards and backwards, and pivot from side to side ever so slightly, but again, please do be careful because these are translucent plastic joints and they have a tendency to snap. In terms of accessories, Diamond Select have spoiled us by giving us quite a lot to digest, including an additional 5 pairs of hands, both translucent invisible effect and fully gloved translucent, non-translucent effect, including the forearms as well, the full gauntlet gloves. So this is very cool. There's all sorts of different hands here. We've got open hands, we've got punching hands, we've got gripping hands, covering the whole gamut that you'd expect here, which is fantastic. And of course, this is creating a lot of different looks for your figure, which is brilliant. She also comes with the visible version of her legs, as well as 2 force field effects, sort of a general shield and more of an orb punching effect, which I think looks pretty cool. And she also has this stand, which is important because this connects into the base, which is this giant force field base, which looks really very nicely done. Now, there's certainly enough going on here to keep you busy with a lot of different looks and really fun features for this figure. I particularly like the orb that goes around the fist hand there. You can simply pull this apart and then clip it together around the fist, which looks great. I think it looks very effective. This sort of force bubble I think looks cool. And I really like this force shield effect as well, which is really nice. Again, that just clips into the forearm and it just looks really very effective, quite seamless in the way it's produced. And I think it looks pretty cool. So of course a number of different looks here which are great. You can combine them all together to create some very impressive stances here, which is pretty cool. I do like this base as well. I think this looks really cool, very dramatic and evocative, which is great. Now, the one thing I did find with this is that there is a very good reason why they've included this additional stand, because she doesn't stand very easily in it without the support of the stand. She has a tendency to lean back and fall over, so you're definitely going to need to use that post, which screws into the bottom and then plugs into the back of the figure itself through that peg hole. Once that's in place, she stands very securely and looks pretty impressive. In terms of scaling, here she is standing next to Mr. Fantastic, so they're roughly comparable. I think this looks pretty good when they're standing next to each other, and they're obviously very complementary in terms of the paint washes that have been used, the colours they've used for these costumes, obviously being produced so closely next to each other in terms of scheduling. They're pretty consistent in terms of their articulation and overall look and aesthetic, which is great. So these two go together very, very nicely. Of course, we also had the Human Torch recently, and before that we had the Thing. Now the Thing is definitely the outlier in this set. He looks very much a very different style and approach to these other figures or these other characters, which is a little bit disappointing. They don't really fit together, but nevertheless still a very nice set all in all, and maybe one day we'll get a tweak or an update to the Thing, which would be fantastic, something more in line with this more traditional look for these characters. Okay then, so final thoughts from me. I'm a little bit torn on this figure. There's a lot of good things about it, but there's also a couple of things that really disappoint me. Overall, I'm gonna give it 3 stars. Now, in terms of the good, I think it's got great articulation for the most part. I really like the accessories, the paint apps are really good, and I think they've produced an all-round pretty nice addition to this line. Where I'm slightly more critical and where I've been removing stars really comes from some of the fundamental things. So for me, one of the biggest stumbling blocks with this figure is this head sculpt. Now, if you don't mind the expression on this face, you don't mind the sculpt, then you could probably add an extra star straight away, because I had to remove one. For me, I'm just not really overly happy with this look for the character, and it's such an important point. Combined is also the rubber hair, which really hinders the articulation in the head. So for me, this really damages and hurts the figure overall. And it definitely leaves me with a feeling of underwhelm. There's just something about this figure that's just a little bit disappointing, which is a real shame, because up until now I've been so impressed with these figures, and as I said, there's not an awful lot wrong with this figure. I feel like a lot of it hinges on this head sculpt, but it does really distract me, and it makes me feel a little bit lukewarm towards this figure overall. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as there'll be plenty more videos soon.